All right, guys, welcome back to another edition of Live Wire. I'm your host, Jared Moore, and on today's program, we have Dr. Hugh Foley. You might remember Dr. Foley from a program we had almost a year ago today. I think it was in April or May of last year, where he was talking about his research into Muskogee hymns. But on today, the reason I'm having him back on the program today is because I had an article referred to me about the new season of Reservation Dogs, with some of the episodes being filmed on the RSU campus, and Dr. Foley's name was mentioned in that as one of the instrumental people. So I hit him up through the email and said, "Hey, you want to come back on and talk about it?" He said he would do it. Great. So thanks so much for joining us today, Mr. Foley or Dr. Foley.
Yes, Jared, honored to be here. I'll just say it's Jay to everybody, and Mado for giving me the opportunity to come back on and talk to you again.
Awesome. So when we had you on the program before, you mentioned that you had worked with Sterlin Harjo before on his documentary. The what was the name of the documentary? It was the church.
This may be the last time.
This may be the last time. So I'm assuming that from that connection, well, why don't you go ahead and tell us the story about how our Rez Dogs came to the RSU campus?
Okay, do my best to wind around and get to that point.
Right.
First, before I ever do a talk, I'd like to acknowledge my son's family. He is Muskogee citizen, and that would be the Burden family. And then I also like to acknowledge my church family down at Hutchjubba and Pastor Eugene Harjo. And that's really why I know what I know in a lot of respects.
Absolutely.
Regarding Muskogee hymns and where they came from. And then my other Muskogee knowledge comes from the Tallahassee Wagagai ceremonial grounds. And both those men who were my good friends are gone now. And that's David Proctor and Sam Proctor. But that's how I come to know what I do. And so I want to give credit to all those entities, because without them, I'm not really talking about anything with regard to the Muskogee world.
Absolutely.
So all respect there. And going back to that church experience, we really, and I'll just tell the story as it's kind of evolved over time. The first feature-length film that Sterlin had that received quite a lot of attention was Barking Water. And because I do work at Rogers State and I teach cinema there, and I work with our Native Studies program and our Native students, we're always looking for things we can bring to campus for our students and the community. So along those lines, when that film came out, I had not yet met Sterlin, but I contacted him and asked him if he would come to campus and show the film, and he agreed. So he came to RSU, and we were showing the film, and we were having an issue with our projector. It wouldn't show a widescreen version of the film. For whatever reason, it would only show the 4:3 version. And so he said, "I can't watch this, because it's not how it's supposed to be."
Right.
Okay, I understand. Everybody else, though, by the way, it was a huge attendance, and people wanted to see that film. However, they had to see it. And so he and I went outside the auditorium, and we were sitting there talking as a few people were coming up. And I told him I'd already seen the film, and I really liked how he put Muskogee hymns in the film and also had a church setting in the film. And then his response to me, because we'd never met before, was, "Well, what do you know about Muskogee hymns, and how do you know?"
Exactly.
And so that led me back to how I became involved with my son's family and the church, which is his family church, for over 100 years, or it's 100 years old now. And so I explained to him what I had learned about the hymns, both from the contemporary pastors and hymn singers of the time, men and women, and then also added on my own historical research on top of that. And so I had the oral history version, and then I had some limited documentation of the Muskogee hymns, and I found out all the things that I found out about them that I talked about the last time I was on the program, and that I talked about in the film This May Be the Last Time. Because as I was talking to Sterlin and I was telling him what I had learned and what I knew about them, he said, "That's great. We need to make a movie."
Yeah, absolutely.
Said, "Okay, well, let me know," And so sure enough, not too long after that, he contacted me and asked if he could interview me about that subject matter so they could take that interview and then see if they could get support to do a full-fledged production.
Right.
So we did that, and it went well, and he got the funding for it. So then we did another interview where we used a different camera, and I more or less said some of the same things.
Mm-hmm.
And then he went around and talked to a lot of other ministers and people associated with Muskogee culture and history and all of that, and put together the film, This May Be the Last Time, which is the title of which is based on the Muskogee hymn, Ispogides Omes Kitliskos. This could be the last time, we don't know.
Mm-hmm.
So the film came out, and next thing you know, it gets accepted at Sundance. And I think this is 2014, if I'm not mistaken.
Mm-hmm.
And so we made a trip out there to Sundance in Utah, and we all stayed in kind of a collective room, and that's really where I became friends with him, and also Watko Long, and just that whole crew. And then some of the crew that was working on the film also later went on to work on Reservation Dogs. So it's sort of the nucleus of that group. We were out there for about a week and went to a couple of showings of the film, and it was just a wonderful experience for me to be able to go there as a cinema professor, and always heard about Sundance, but what is it really? And so I got a chance to experience it, but as a participant, and meaning I was in the film. And so that was a really interesting experience.
Absolutely.
So, and it's kind of a long, this is the way the story goes to get to Reservation Dogs.
Right.
So once that film came out, that generated This May Be the Last Time came out, generated a lot of interest in the Muskogee hymns and the history and everything surrounding it. So next thing you know, I'm going around and doing even more talks than I normally do, which as a professor is I get asked to go out and talk to people about my primary subject areas. And so Sterlin was getting the same kinds of contacts, and so wound up I'd go maybe somewhere that he was showing the film, or
mm-hmm.
two of us would show up somewhere and do a talk of some type, or we would bring in a Muskogee hymn singer, and we just stayed in touch that way. And, you know, Sterlin and I had several mutual interests, not just the Muskogee world and history and lifeways and everything, but contemporary music, and specifically contemporary American roots music. And so I'm often in Tulsa and moving around Tulsa and doing things, and I run into him all over the place, often at shows.
Mm-hmm.
He's a big Jacob Tovar fan. And so we just kind of kept our friendship going, and then he might ask me for a little help on like Miko, or just a little something here and there that he knew I would have access to the information, so he'd contact me about it. So we just developed this friendship over these years. And then I would go back to, season 1 of Reservation Dogs. I'm here at my home in Stillwater, and I was just grading some summer school essays, and the phone rings, and I see it's Sterlin, pick it up. Hey, how's it going? He goes, hey, you want to come sing in my TV show? And I said, well, sure. So, and I've always honored and flattered that he will bring me in just for whatever it is. Over the years, I've done a couple of voiceover things for him, for a 1491s thing, and then I think he referred to somebody else who used my voice on something else that was a native production elsewhere, and so I appreciate being brought in to do that kind of thing. And he said, yeah, we just want you to come in as one of the hymn singers and just be in a scene. I was like, okay, that sounds cool. And so I went through all the routine. And that's the COVID era still at that point. And so we had to go through this process to make sure we were vaccinated and wearing the masks and all of that. And so we went out, and I was just in one scene there in season 1 where I was a hymn singer with some other hymn singers in a cemetery setting. And that was all fine and interesting. And I saw some of my friends from the Muskogee church world, they're singing. It's always fun and nice to get together to sing with people, blend our voices together. So year goes by, second season comes around. And once again, I'm pretty much minding my own business. I get contacted by Sterlin again. Hey, we're doing another. Can you come do a church scene? And actually, I don't think he called me this time. I think, his casting people call me. Sure. Okay. So season 2, I went in and there was another scene in a church wherein he wanted some hymns, and so I was in that scene as well. And so I was I felt blessed to be part of it and have a little, just a micro moment in those pop culture events that happened here over the last couple of years, because Reservation Dogs has gotten so much positive attention nationally, not just among viewers, but from the industry as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so then we fast forward another year. I think he and I did a Woody Guthrie. I think both years for the Woody Guthrie Festival, we did a couple things for them. One during COVID was online, kind of like this.
Mm-hmm.
And then another one, we actually went to the Crystal Theater with a friend of mine, Curtis Scott, who's an excellent hymn singer. And we did the talk, and Curtis sang some examples. And so that's how all that went. So this year, I was at school at my office, and phone rang, didn't recognize the number, so I just let it go to voicemail. Listened to the voicemail. Turns out to be one of the production managers from Reservation Dogs. And the suggestion had come up as to, what about Roger State? I believe Sterlin made the suggestion. Well, you need to contact Hugh. And so production manager contacted me. We're interested in seeing if we can find a spot for a scene that we have, or actually an episode that we have, that is, and I can't really talk about the actual episode.
Right.
But they were looking for some things we had on campus for that episode. After it airs, I can.
Yeah, and I should explain it.
Detail, but right now I can't really.
Right.
I'm not supposed to discuss any of the plot or storyline.
Right. And that's for the audience too. That's just something that happens with these types of productions. Is there's certain things that's embargoed that you can't talk about. And I do want to mention to you guys watching, if you have any questions for Dr. Foley, pop them in there and we'll try to answer them. We can't really talk about, just like we just said, any plot points or spoilers or anything like that, so we won't be talking about them. But if you have any other questions about Sterlin or the process, to me, one of the things I also wanted to have you on to talk about was you teach cinema and also Native American studies at Rogers State.
Yeah.
What, from your perspective, what's the impact of a show like this? Because I don't think we've ever really seen a show like this be produced.
There's a few answers to that, I think. Let me go back to this production thing.
Oh yeah, sure, go for it.
How it rolled off, and then once we get through that, and I can sort of leave that, and my brain can turn in a different direction. So for me, and it relates to just what you asked, which is, as a cinema professor, I'm always looking for real world experiences that I can share with students that further enhance their understanding and appreciation for how motion pictures are made, and then how they can be interpreted. And so the first part of that is how they're made. And so this was really interesting to me, because I went through the whole process of being contacted by the production manager to a final walkthrough of the facility after the production was over with another production manager team to make sure everything was okay. So in that time space, what I got to witness and experience was production manager calling me, okay, we're going to send a scout up who was a photographer, came up and took pictures of our facility to see if it would match what they needed for their plot line. After that, the production designer comes up, who's the guy that makes sure everything looks how they want it to look. And it's not a yes yet, it's just, okay, let him take a look. Then get a little closer, I think the fourth day, the tech crew and the director came up, and I believe we can say the director of this episode was Black Horse Lowe. And so they all came up. And then on the fifth day, there was another group of technicians that came up, because we're talking carpenters, electricians, painters, lighting guys. Where's the track going to go that the camera's going to roll on? If it's that, is this long enough for our jib or boom or whatever we're putting up, and all that stuff. So that was really interesting. So then they say, okay, we want to do it. Well, then after that, we get in the contractual process, which is way beyond me. And if you're not aware, the Reservation Dogs ultimately is a Disney production.
Oh, really?
Okay. And so Rogers State ultimately is the University of Oklahoma production because we're governed by the OU Board of Regents. So it's Cameron, us, and OU. So now, before any of this can happen, the contract that Disney has to be approved by the OU lawyers, who are our lawyers. All I do is forward it on, and in my imagination, I've got Disney characters of whatever you want to pick versus OU football players, they softball players, and they are like discussing, and so they're back and forth, and they make their agreement, and essentially we'll put it back how it was, no matter what, and we won't leave till you approve it. That's the bottom line of it all. So the OU lawyer said, okay, all right, fine. Now here comes the production crew. So it took a whole week basically to get the sets ready for the scenes that they wanted to have. And we had, I believe, 4, 5 spaces, 6 total, I guess, that they wanted to use for this particular episode. So they came in and started to make it look like they wanted it to look like.
Mm-hmm.
And once they got all that through, the next week, Monday morning, the trucks start showing up at 4 a.m. and because they want to be ready with that first sunlight.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a moving, anybody who's in Okmulgee or has seen the whole crew, it's multiple trucks. It's a place where everybody can eat. It's a lounging spot. You've got the dressing rooms and, you know, just all the stuff. It's like a little village rolling around on wheels. So they all show up, and then they start shooting the scenes, and it really was just 2 days of shooting the scenes. And so I got to watch all that go down, and I'm not going to really say anything much more about it than that, but I got to watch it all happen and visit with Sterlin and the other people that I know that I've known for a few years now who are technical people on the crew, or a former student of mine actually was on the crew now, and so it was good to see him. And then we were able to get one of our Rogers State students on as a production assistant or kind of a site liaison type person.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was a great opportunity. If you're a 19, 20-year-old kid from, I don't know what, I think he's from Chelsea or something like that, which is a small community northeast of Claremore there. Now all of a sudden he's with an official major label production.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so that was a really positive experience for him. Once it was over, trucks leave, they go to whatever their next site was, and then it takes a few days for the production crew to put everything back how it was, exactly like it was, and right down to every little spec. And so we went through and checked everything off with our physical plant manager. Everybody was cool, complete. I took a lot of photographs that I can't share until after the show airs, but I have a great PowerPoint coming up for my students from initial point of contact to clearance and departure and every step. So that speaks to your second question. What kind of impact does this program have? And I would say there's several ways to go with that. I think you can, first of all, approach it from just the pure local impact of the people who work on the program.
Mm-hmm.
These are local people who are very skilled in their profession, who don't have to leave Oklahoma to go work somewhere in LA or New York or go on the road or something like that. They can actually have some work here at home. Now, those same people may go on the road and do productions elsewhere, but at least there's a part of time where they can be close to home. And so as a result of that, my sense of the Reservation Dogs set is you have a majority of people who are Oklahomans or connected to the state one way or another. And then you have a group of people who are from wherever they're from that are industry professionals at the top of their craft and are brought in to fulfill whatever that responsibility is. So you have a tremendous local impact. Not only that, just on people working, But you also have the impact of the potential for people to be an extra. They had big calls for all kinds of extras, and you can get that experience here. And I think that was really good. Thirdly, and one of the big things I think is as you start to get into what the project actually represents to people. Um, well, there's a lot of things. My brain goes a few different ways. So I've got right now I have like 4 or 5 televisions going on in my head. It's like talk about that, talk about that.
Right.
So what I'm going to say is that I'm going to go from another local level, from a viewer level. I have a very good friend, and I don't want to reveal their name, but their son entered an art contest recently, and I was working at this art festival as a volunteer, and I saw it. And it was a Reservation Dogs character. And this particular young man is autistic and functioning autistic, but he really, and he's also Native. And he really drew a lot of inspiration from this program because it's finally, and you may have heard this line before, given people an opportunity to see a program that's not stereotypical, that represents their real lives of going to Indian Health Service, for example,
right,
or dealing with all of the varying degrees of cultural knowledge in Indian country. And this is with all said in all respect, that some people know a lot and some people don't know anything.
Right,
and then
absolutely.
There's that whole spectrum in between. And so that show addresses that in some ways. And Sterlin has always, in his other work, addressed aspects of Native spirituality. But I think the major theme that comes out of this film, it's funny, okay?
Yes.
But humor is used as an instructional tool. And so the humor draws you in. But I would have to say that I'll just speak on seasons 1 and 2, that suicide is a primary theme in season 1 and 2. This is, of course, a very dark subject, but unfortunately, it's a huge subject for Native people, especially Native youth and Native teenagers who get hopeless. And so, as I've seen Sterlin write, he wants to bring some light to this darkness. And so, yes, there's negatives in Indian country. I'll use that accepted term, especially with regard to youth and what their opportunities are, how they feel about themselves because of what popular culture still says they are, the pressure that they have to succeed when things are different for Native youth in a lot of situations. And so I think that it's given some, not just hope, but a sense of being and belonging, an existential justification, if you will. Hey, look, there's a show laughing about the same things I laugh about and crying about the same things I cry about, and has a little bit of understanding of Native spirituality, which is different than mainstream Euro-American Judeo-Christian spirituality. Not saying one way or the other anything about it. It's just different. There's different things.
Absolutely.
So you have that big issue where we're dealing with serious social issues, but in the context of humor. And I think that's a really powerful aspect of that.
Yeah, I think
Sterlin has also said, this is not just a Native show, Native comedy. What he does is not just, and I'm not speaking for him, putting words in his mouth. What I'm doing is either quoting things I've seen him write or things he's been quoted saying in interviews. And so what Sterlin has talked about is a regional cinema. It's not just Native cinema, but it's a regional cinema. I think these lessons are learned sort of from the Coen brothers, not necessarily for Sterlin's point of view, for our context. When you watch a Coen brothers movie, they're real heavy on the accents of a particular geographic location, and sort of the cultural irony images that exist within that environment. And Sterlin does some of those very same things, where he has that unique eye for the ironic aspects of the Native American experience. And a lot of people go back to the IHS scenes, of anybody who's Native who has to go to IHS because they don't have some fallback, some other healthcare plan. Right. They have to go there. And as a result of that, there's a sequence of events that often happens that's depicted in there, and people could relate to that. I had an older Native woman tell me, she was Oglala though, not Muskogee at all. When she saw barking water, she was talking to me and she goes, "That's how it really is." He got it. That's how it really is. So, we have to remember it is a dramatic narrative with comic influences, but it is couched in the real experiences that Native people have, or even that non-Natives have, as a result of being part of the Native environment,
right,
and witnessing these things. So I think you have those impacts. Not only that, but there's so much cultural discussion going on now about what is and what isn't appropriate. And so people who are of a certain group, whatever that group is, they are the spokespeople for that group. They're the artists who are going to say things that are most resonant from that group, as opposed to an outsider observing this group and saying, "Oh, there's the interesting things I want to depict from my point of view," and make those my show.
Yeah.
So what Sterlin and other Native directors are doing now, as this grows, is depicting from within. And that's one of the most important trends I think we've seen in the last 20, I'll go ahead and say 25 years, in Native media, where now, like yourself, this program we have now, the films that the Chickasaw Nation, Choctaw Nation are producing, the Cherokee Nation Film Office, the big 3D studio they built there in Owasso, the OCO television program, and then of course what is happening at Mvskoke Media as well. And not to overhype anybody, but we have more stories coming from within. If you've seen Cheyenne Arapaho TV, for example, that's an excellent example of a tribe saying, "Hey, here's an opportunity. We can have a public television station. Then we can get all this equipment, and then we're going to teach people how to use it. And then we're going to produce materials that are about us, and they're from us." And so that's what Sterlin has going on. These are stories about Native people, specifically this Muskogee world, and they're from that perspective. And so I think that's really important as well. And the only other thing, before I know you have another question, is combating stereotypes. That's why we hope that at some point there will be a wider distribution of this program, because there has been a shift in the understanding about stereotypes nationally. And I think a lot of this came about as a result of George Floyd and everything that happened as a result of that. And we saw some changes nationally. But where we don't see so many changes are locally, meaning within our state.
Right.
And I am not going to go the political direction, because I could talk for a whole hour, about that
part
of it. But that's not where we want to go.
Well, it's a different program for it.
Yeah, that's a different program altogether. But
I welcome you to come back on anytime, though. I'll go down that rabbit hole with you for sure.
Well, I won't even say the names. I'm just going to say that I'll say this, that this is just slightly off topic, but not really. Last January, I believe it was, I was asked to go to a public school in Sand Springs Public Schools. It's public, and they asked me to do more or less a cultural sensitivity talk about the Native history of the Sand Springs and Tulsa area, and what was an appropriate image and wasn't an appropriate image, and how we've evolved to the point where we are. But what I thought was very powerful was some introductory comments that I heard from the superintendent. And this is pretty nefarious, I think, and it shows you where we are in our state right now. And so what she said was that I'm going to be careful about what I'm saying here, because there is probably a spy in the room. And I was like, a spy? And then what I realized she meant was that was from the state level, that there was somebody in the room that was going to go reporting back to the state level what happened.
Right.
And for me, I'm a college professor, and I was brought in to do in service, or there's another word for it, but it's some training at the beginning of the year to kind of give everybody some information that might be professional development.
Right.
That's how it goes. So I let it fly, and I let it go on some things that I think are really important, and they fly in the face of current educational administration from our state level. And I'm not going to say anything negative about that. It's just what it is. Anybody who knows a little bit about it knows what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
So I did the whole talk, and a lot of people there in Sand Springs, for example, don't know the word Wegawa. Okay? Wekiwa. And if you go through Sand Springs on 412, that's Muskogee Nation, you see the Wegawa Shopping Center. Okay, well, if you go down another road, you can go to the Wegawa Indian Baptist Church, which is a Muskogee Baptist church. Okay, so Wegawa is a word for spring water, right? So Welitka, Wetumpka, Wewoka, Wegawa, right? So it describes the water. The first syllable is wewa, and then the adjective comes after.
Yes.
Which is why a lot of Native people say native languages are backwards from the English language.
Yeah.
So anyway, I did this whole talk, and you could tell they were appreciative. And but that was the thing that really got me, a spy. And when I heard that, the next thing they said was, well, Dr. Foley, we need your invoice. I was like, I don't want anything for this, because I don't want anybody tracing back to you that you've paid me whatever, some nominal fee to come in and talk to you guys about accurate history, diversity, and sensitive subjects, because there's a lot of it. And especially in the Sand Springs area, some of their major names, if you know the name Charles Page Boulevard, and the things that he did at the time, pre-allotment with the oil leases and the orphans, and how Sand Springs was created. It's essentially can I use the R word? It's a racist history.
Yeah.
And the way it was created as a divided community. Okay, so I bring all that up because here's Sterlin and Reservation Dogs, which it is a reservation now, but a different kind of reservation than we typically see. And I think that that's important, that part of it. But Reservation Dogs is countering a lot of these stereotypes that have existed for a long time about Native people, and especially Native youth. And it's couching it in terms of humor, but emphasizing some of the serious issues that go along with being Native in a contemporary world, and the pressures that are on a person, and how that can lead them to depression, and how that depression can lead to suicide, especially if you're a teenager.
Yeah.
And I'm not accepted because, and I'll quote another Muskogee person, Dr. Pete Koster. What he used to say was, society says this is me, war bonnet, teepee.
Right.
Whereas if you're Muskogee, you're not war bonnet and teepee. So if you're a Muskogee youth and all you ever see is war bonnet and teepee, with all respect and love to my Plains friends, you start to wonder about your own self. Why am I not depicted accurately? Is my tribal identity not flashy enough?
Yeah.
Or it doesn't fit some kind of role?
And I think you really hit the nail on the head too with the comment when you were talking about the humor of it, because a lot of times all of these problems that we're talking about are presented to natives and non-natives alike as kind of like news coverage, like it's serious. These are issues and everything. And it's because it's information that's being reported by people from the outside looking at the situation, and they're trying to call attention to a problem or whatever. You don't have that, like the humor that's on Reservation Dogs. It's not necessarily just humor; it's native humor. It's Creek humor, and that allows the native citizens to kind of like identify with the characters like they wouldn't identify with the issue if it was just presented to them as, here's statistics or facts or whatever. You're allowed to kind of like internalize it and also like chuckle because you're like, oh, like everybody else is seeing how it is for us too. I think that's one of the big impacts that I've seen. I think it was interesting you brought up the Coen brothers because it also kind of has that ironic humor, like you mentioned, to it, and that's also kind of like a native humor thing. I guess all humor is kind of like that, but Sterling really nails that. So we are at 35 minutes. I wanted to thank you so much for coming on the program and talking about everything that you've talked about today. We've had a couple of comments here. We don't have any questions, but I wanted to read you some of the comments.
Yeah, I'll respond.
Portuguese Possum says, great story. Thanks for sharing. T.Y. Prohl says, humor disarms the barriers we put around ourselves and also mentions that it's not just racist, it's genocidal. Oh, we just had a question pop up. Is Creek Nation going to pay the black people they own money to? That's I don't know. I don't know the answer to that one, Big Rob.
Yeah,
but
that's a different question. Off topic there.
Well, we'll see what happens in the future with that. There's court cases going through.
Yes. Well, and not to limit it, and I could talk about that area as well. But
that's well, and I wanted to extend to you the opportunity, get in touch with me. Well, I'd love to have you come on and talk about whatever other issues you'd like to talk about too, because from my perspective, you have an interesting perspective as someone who, while they are not a Native American, is very deeply enmeshed in the Native American community. And that's a perspective that also needs to get spread out more. And I think that's going to be the objective for the future for all these types of media, is not just only natives seeing natives do things from the native perspective. It's also like just the general public being able to be exposed to Native American culture and identity that they are actually a part of and they didn't even realize it, right?
Well, yeah, and I think that's something that I bring up a lot in my talks that I do, that people don't realize the impact that having these 39 tribes in our midst has on our state. And now things have evolved to the point where almost half the state is reservation land. And what does that mean?
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean anything to the non-native private property owner. That's not, a worry that anybody should have, but it is causing people at the state level to realize that, hey, we've got some complicated questions here that aren't solved by just a culture war or the dog whistle, the woke,
right.
Oh, that's too woke. Today, I'll tell you this, I was in the post office today, and I saw that the Standing Bear stamp, came out in May, and I've been trying to get one, and I still don't have one. And I asked today if there was one. And I was thinking about this in the context of Native history, because he's such an important figure, and his story is so vital. And all of our students in the K through 12 realm, wherever they decide to teach that, should know about Ponca Chief Standing Bear.
Yes.
And his trial and what it meant to Native people. And now he was an important civil rights leader, so on and so forth. And yet I couldn't get a stamp because they were all sold out of all the different people. Yeah, people have been coming in here for these all the time because I'm in Stillwater. Ponca's right up there.
Yep.
And so he's kind of a local hero in this area. But I think that more of that, needs to be expressed. And you mentioned the Friedman earlier, even for Muskogee people, that history of people of African descent in Friedman, and how that's where some of the Muskogee hymns come from.
Yes.
The first attorney general ever of the Muskogee Creek Nation was a Friedman. So you have all these things going on, and I don't really go down the path of a contemporary court case and who should be enrolled and who shouldn't be enrolled and all that. But there are other precedences for that already that have happened in Cherokee Nation and Seminole Nation.
Right.
And really, if those are the precedences, the same thing's going to happen.
Well, and while we're talking about too, and if you're watching this, there is a hearing in the Friedman case on Friday that I'll be going to court. It was scheduled for last Friday, but they rescheduled it for this Friday. So we might be having an update on that. There still hasn't been a decision issued. So just to touch base on that, if you're watching this.
Yeah, I think that's important because that particular story is like red meat to the press,
Mm.
because it's a story wherein the perception is that somehow Native people are discriminating against people of African descent who at one time were enrolled as part of the Muskogee Nation. And we all know all the problems with enrollment and everything that happened. And, you know, I'm not going to go down the whole path,
Yeah.
but it is important to note that that becomes a dog whistle for the press, because
Yeah.
remember, it's, you know, if back to the news business, which I was in for many years and still am in some ways, you know, dog bites man, no story. Man bites dog, story.
Yeah.
What's the
Yeah.
analogy there?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, Native Americans experience racism and have been treated wrongly by the country. And we know that. Wait a minute.
Yeah.
Native Americans are discriminating against black people?
Right.
Woo!
Yep.
Explosion. We got a
Yep.
big story
It's a
now.
big story.
And yeah, so I think that we have to take it in that context as well, because we do live in an age of hyperbole where one granule of truth, even if it's not a lot of truth, still becomes a story. So somebody might click on it and follow that. And so there's so many things that we have to be aware of now as uh, consumers of media, and also as teachers and educators and students. What we learn, I'm leaning into Chat GPT and what AI can do now, and how we're going to be able to use that for our students. And I've gotten students to go in and ask it native questions. It doesn't do so great on some of the native questions,
Yeah.
but it does do well on some of them. It just kind of depends what you're asking, and that gets back to, you know, who owns knowledge,
Yeah.
and specifically cultural, traditional knowledge. And get into that whole realm. And so there's always more to talk about. I'm happy to visit about these things. You know, I have a couple of radio programs where I get to take off on Saturdays and Sundays on those that are native focused. And then I have my television class in the spring at RSU. And so I have plenty of opportunities to express myself, but we have to be cautious. So we're not just, you know, being a hothead, left or right political figure, but as an educator and journalist, what we're supposed to do is look at both sides and then
Yes.
present both sides.
Yes. Absolutely.
But not all, you know, we guide the listener or viewer into what, and student into what they might think, but ultimately it's up to them, because that's what we want to teach is critical thinking skills.
Yes.
But all the way back to Sterlin again and the importance of this program, I probably will leave it with this. What it also does is continues to show Oklahoma as a place where major productions can happen. We've already seen this with the films that people have talked about and been shot and everything, but this is a recurring television program. This is just a film that people come in here for 2 months and split. You know, this is a recurring thing that's happened again and again, and it's made, and Sterlin was very vocal about wanting to make the show here, to use Muskogee Nation as a setting, to use Oklahoma as a setting, to use Oklahoma people on the crew, to use Oklahoma people where possible in the cast. And so I think that that's another one of the benefits, along with what we've mentioned earlier, is that Oklahoma is a viable spot because it's a little less expensive here to work and live and operate. And we have a lot of skilled people here who can fulfill these positions. So I think it's important culturally. It's important in a pop culture sense. It's important to Native people and Native youth. And I think it's very important for those of us who are scholars of Native cinema and media and where it fits in the timeline of Native people being depicted, because what we've seen, and really it starts with Smoke Signals, I think you kind of go back to that, where instead of it being non-natives producing and funding and directing and writing and in some cases acting in films about natives, starting really with Smoke Signals and forward to where we are now, it's Native people producing Native stories that they are writing using Native crew and Native cast. And if you're a non-Native, you don't like it or it hits you in the wrong place, well, that's, you know, change the channel.
Yeah, exactly.
But even if the language is a little harsh occasionally, like you can't necessarily show that to little kids and put it on network TV, but you know, there's no language in there that kids have never heard on the playground or in their home or wherever. So that's the only thing that really I think people have, you know, taken a slight or made them blanch a little bit. It's like, oh, the language, but that's reality. It's how people talk. Not all of us are like, perfect elocutionists, avoiding every negative word that even exists in the English language. So and we do have and I will go ahead and say this: I'm 62 now. We have a more vulgar society than we had, when I was a teenager,
Mm-hmm.
and then all my years in radio and broadcasting, and we just lost some decorum. It seems like, and
It seems that way.
yeah. So I think anything that reflects that is really a reflection of the time.
Sure, absolutely.
And not a negative, really. You just have to contextualize it and work with it.
Well, on that note, I want to thank you for coming on the program again, and also mention we didn't say anything vulgar during our interview or our time together, so that's good. I did want to touch on a couple of things that were put into the chat, just to give you guys a heads up. Portuguese Possum asked, can you speak a little bit on the hymns? And we actually did a whole interview on that last year, and I'm going to, after the stream is over, I'll put the link to the previous interview in there so you can watch that program, because we go into the whole hymns thing and the connections and everything. So, and it's a really good interview. So, and then we had another question from T.Y. Prohl. Do you think we need an Indian Home Guard militia to protect the res? It's not really related to the program we're doing right here now, but my opinion is yes. So that's my opinion, and not the opinion of Muskogee Media. But so
let me jump on that. Just
oh yeah, sure, go for it.
You have a light horse, number one, and there aren't. With regard to defending the reservation against outside forces, meaning like, what are those outside forces? Are we talking, like white nationalists, or like the Nazis? Are they going to come in, or what are we defending from?
Right. I was just going to jump in there to explain that part of it, because I don't know what T.Y. Pearl's asking about, if he's asking specifically about outside forces. But there is a scenario, as we saw with COVID, where, because this is the fear, is that martial law could be declared, right? And because you would have to have National Guard troops from Oklahoma go in and secure the various cities and towns and stuff, how could they go onto the reservation and do that here? Or because then you would have federal troops coming in. Whereas if you had a Native American National Guard or something, if there was an emergency like that, then you would have a whole response team already ready on the res. You would have to pull forces off from there. And we've seen similar things like that with the emergency management teams. So every municipality has an emergency management manager and guys that are there that are called out in situations where they need to go, maybe find a dead body or something. And the tribe has that too. But so I think that might be what T.Y. Pearl's asking. Oh no, he's saying defend against the governor. Sorry.
Okay. Well, let me say.
So go back with what you're saying.
First of all, the governor already sent like 100 National Guard troops to the border, so we're already short 100 anyway because they're down there in Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
With regard to a civil administrative function, I could see how you would want to have somebody ready for that, and I wouldn't get into all the eccentricities of jurisdictions and those sorts of things. But I've heard the very same thing people talk about. These militia groups that are going to defend against when they take all of the firearms away from everybody.
Right.
They're going to be the only ones left. And I have probably one thing to say about that, being former military. If you've never seen the A-10 Warthog, go look at that ship and what that airship does. And I don't care what you put together as your militia, that shows up, you're toast.
Yeah,
and so
there's a huge gap there, and having an AK-47 or something as your personal firearm and military grade machinery that they have, even from the 90s and on, is outclassed.
Well, let's remember what turned the tide of the Plains Indian Wars was the repeating pistol and then the Gatling gun. Mm-hmm. So up to that point, it was kind of stalematey because it was just a one-shot deal. And once the 6-shooter and the Gatling gun came in, that ended the military opposition from tribes. So.
Well, and it's kind of off topic, and we went a little bit over time, but it's been a fun conversation, and I thank you for being on the program. There's still in here asking questions about the governor and the tobacco
Just give
compact.
me one governor question. Let me take off on one.
Well, they're not really questions. It's mostly negative things.
Okay, I would say a few things about that real
Sure,
fast.
go for it.
Because all of our tribal leaders have made their statements about the governor,
Mm-hmm.
and I've never personally met him. I've only seen him speak. I wouldn't say anything about his, family or how he runs his personal life or anything. But we just saw a major example of his leadership style this past week.
Yes.
So, and he can say, as he did in the news interview that I saw, oh, he was connected by text and so forth. But there seems to be a lack of empathy with him.
Yeah.
And a lack of the concept of service. And here's why I want to bring this up. There's a difference between running a business for corporate profit and being in service to the people as a public servant.
Yeah.
They're two different things. And he came out of a business program. He went into business, was successful in business, raised money, was able to fund and get funding for his governor's campaign, which he won with the support of tribal leaders because of his status as an enrolled citizen of the Cherokee Nation, which the New York Times proved was fraudulent. And all the paperwork is online. His ancestor bribed his way onto the rolls. Okay.
Well, and to touch on that, just as a clarification for the audience, that was challenged through the Cherokee Supreme Court, and the Cherokee Supreme Court ultimately found that they could not remove him from citizenship. So he is still a Cherokee citizen. Just a clarification
he's a citizen. He's a citizen, no doubt about it. He can't be just disenrolled. There are other non-natives who are on the Cherokee rolls for various reasons. So on the Dawes rolls, there's a section of intermarried whites. So if you were white and you were intermarried, you got your own roll. Well, if your spouse died and you remarried another white, your descendants would all be Cherokee citizens because they are descendant from someone on that intermarried white roll. So that's a little bit of a different issue. But I just want to emphasize that being a public servant to the people and being considered the person who's leading the people as a public servant is different than that corporate head. And I understand his perspective is to run the state like a business, as his idol, that we know who his idol is, a business person who went into politics. That is different from all my years in public service than working for the people. And what I saw with what happened to Tulsa a week ago with the storm and hundreds of thousands of people out of power, we didn't get a conciliatory message. We didn't get, hey, hope you guys are all right. And then when he showed up, it's not like he went out and did a photo op with a chainsaw. We've seen his photo ops with firearms in schools and firearms of flipping burgers and sticking it to the libs. But where's the photo op of him with a chainsaw helping some grandma whose tree has fallen onto her house? And that may be the only thing he did all day. Instead, we get his official looking outfit giving a stern answer that, oh, we were connected the whole time and we're doing everything we can. Instead of, our hearts go out to the people of Tulsa and I want to help them. But so to me, it was just indicative of his leadership overall. That he is more of a business person than a public servant. And I think that he's repeated that several times, along with early on showing a complete lack of understanding of Indian country and the law with regard to Indian country. And we just got this again with the Supreme Court ICWA decision that we got 2 weeks ago, that Native people, he always says, I'm for all 4 million Oklahomans and nobody should be treated differently. Well, Native people are treated differently because they're political entities first and a racial group second. And so as a result of that, there are differences. And he's had a real challenge acknowledging those things. So that's really all I want to say. I mean, he's got a tough job. He does a lot of other things that aren't Indian country.
And I wanted to touch on something you're saying there. Maybe you're watching this and you're saying, well, all I care about is that he's a businessman. I would, on that point, also challenge that, because one of the things that's most recently been reported, and we've got a story on it on our website on MuskogeeMedia.com, is the veto override for the tobacco compacts failed on Monday. And so what's actually going to happen from that, though, is the state of Oklahoma isn't going to get any of that tax revenue. So the whole debacle with Stitt challenging the gaming compacts is putting tax revenue and casino revenue that would go back to the state in jeopardy. So that's not a good business deal.
Yes, I would say that's true, and I think that what you touched on in a really good way is that political techniques seem to be vindictive. And if he doesn't get his way, then he pouts and costs other people success. But here's what I would say in the long run. What I've talked to numerous tribal leaders about this. Okay, he's going to be governor for what? Another 3 more years?
Mm-hmm.
Well, how long is Muskogee Creek Nation going to be here?
Right.
Well, we hope forever. And so anything that he does, the tribes can just stall for a few years because we all know time is different in Indian country.
Yeah.
And so I think that that's what I've heard from Native leadership is like, we'll just wait him out. We don't need this or that from him. We have our own thing going. Once he's out, we'll deal with the next person that may be more favorable.
And I think generally, too, you can see the contrast in how public service is viewed between the Oklahoma's government and the tribal nations, because a lot of those nations are saying, we got enough on our plate trying to serve our citizens right now. We can't get into scuffles with this guy all the time every time he wants to start something.
Perfect example. On Saturday, while the perception was that the governor wasn't doing anything, Choctaw Nation, Muskogee Nation are delivering ice for free to people in Tulsa who didn't have any power still. I've got one of my oldest friends I was in the Army with. He's 70 now, and he didn't have power for a week, and he was struggling, there. I went over and got him and took him out to eat, cool off and stuff. But it was, kind of hard to see. And I think that, for whatever reason, Governor Stitt hasn't really had to struggle.
Yeah.
Early on, if you remember, he used a legal term called unjust enrichment with regard to tribes. This is early on.
Yeah.
And he said that tribes were unjustly enriched by gaming. And that's why Oklahoma needed a better deal. And to use that legal term against tribes just seemed way over the line. Yeah. Unjust enrichment, really? Well, then let's point it back at him and say that he's a descendant of someone who fraudulently enrolled on the Dawes rolls, which then gave their family land, which allowed them to have a land base from which to create their own wealth. So in many ways, Governor Kevin Stitt is unjustly enriched from his fraudulent enrollment with regard to his family. But he doesn't portray it that way.
No.
Unsubstantiated slander was his response.
Oh, T.Y. Pearl has a comment here, and I need to mention it too while we're talking about the disaster relief. He says, to remind people about the natural disaster assistance Muskogee Nation provides to our citizens, up to $7,500. There's a story about that on MuskogeeMedia.com right now, so if you pop over to MuskogeeMedia.com, you can find that story, and I believe there is a link to that application there. But that being said, we're at 58 minutes, so we got to wrap, guys, because I can't go over an hour. But Dr. Foley, thank you so much for coming on today. It's been a great discussion. I'll have you back on anytime anything's going on. Or do you want to plug real quick your radio programs? Are they online anywhere?
Well, we have two. One's on 1600 a.m. in Cushing, which is just over the Muskogee Nation line. So you can hear it. It's on Saturday morning at 10. Mm-hmm. And then the other one is on 91.3 FM. On RSU radio, and that's Sunday morning at 10. So okay. Saturday, 1600 a.m., Sunday, 91.3, and it gets around in those areas. You can also listen online.
Awesome. Is that at RSU's website to listen online? Or?
Yes.
Okay,
and
cool.
then 1600kush.com.
All right. So if you guys want to check out.
There's more to talk about, Jared.
Yeah, for sure. And you talk about the hymns on your radio program? Is that the type of radio program it is?
Yeah, it's called Native Air. And so I do native news, announcements, and play music.
Awesome. Cool. Well, that being said, Mado for being on. And for you guys out there, we have another live stream on July 3rd with Mary Catherine Nagel talking about her one-woman play that's going to premiere at the River Spirit called On the Far End. So tune in next week for that, and we'll see you guys later. Chihichoth, Lees.
Wadohadam Chicha, please.